So several things are happening, of course, in the news around Bitcoin this week and really over this last month that has started to shift some major action within countries that are starting to make really big moves. Obviously, you know about El Salvador. And today we thought, hey, let's get somebody that's really somewhat of an expert on this topic. And that, of course, is Mr. Peter McCormack, who is the host of the What Bitcoin Did podcast. Great to have you, Peter.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
And when I say somewhat of an expert, there's not a whole lot of experts on this subject just yet. It's so new, but your chance to get in front of President Bukele was pretty amazing. Let's just kind of jump into that. Obviously, you found a lot, and I know you've been down to El Salvador a few times over the past few years, learned a lot about the government, the economy, and kind of just the people. What are some of the things that you think were the big influencing factors for them to make this move so dynamically and so, just so forthright in sense of let's do it?
Well, it's a good question, but I mean, I can't really answer for the president or, his advisors why they took the decision they did. I mean, I've done the interview. They've answered the questions I put to them. The only way I can answer it is to say why what I've noticed and what I've understood about the Bitcoin network and also what I've understood about El Salvador that makes this seem like an ideal country to make this first step. So I would never expect a country like the USA or the UK or Germany to be the first to take these steps because we have stable currencies and we don't really particularly have governments who are open to new ideas that might threaten their control of their sovereign currency. But El Salvador is a dollarized nation. It's after the Civil War, they've for the last 20 years they've used the dollar as their currency, which means while they've had a stable currency, which is a rare thing in the region, they don't have control over that currency, and that would be fine if the U.S. Policy wasn't to keep printing money to dig themselves out of every financial crisis. Right. We saw that in 2008, which seemed quite excessive. Now we look at what's happened during the COVID crisis, and its magnitude is much higher. Something like, is it 40% of the money supply has been printed in the last year? And that has knock-on effects, one of those being inflation. Yet when the currency is devaluing, no stimulus checks are reaching the people of El Salvador, and it just means everything they have to buy becomes more expensive. So, and when we look at one of the most important properties of Bitcoin is that there is a fixed supply. There are 21 million. Now, yes, listen, we can talk about how the price can be volatile, but anyone who looks at the price chart, zooms out, looks over multi-years, Bitcoin continues to appreciate in value because more people are joining the Bitcoin network. Very basic supply and demand rules. So it makes sense for them to want to adopt Bitcoin and give the people of El Salvador an opportunity to hold Bitcoin. I as a Bitcoiner hold Bitcoin because I want to long-term protect my wealth from the debasement of the currency, and they've put in place a policy which allows the whole country to do this. So it makes sense for that, but it also makes sense for another reason, is not just the Bitcoin network itself, but the Bitcoin rails as a payment network to help support remittance. If you look, something like 15% of the GDP of El Salvador comes via remittance from people working in the US, and these people have to take a haircut for the money that goes to the remittance companies, and that can be anything from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of really high values depending on how much you're sending, and sometimes these people are sending small amounts. So it makes sense for the Bitcoin networks to be used, the Bitcoin rails to be used to support remittance, but also makes sense for people to be able to protect their wealth.
Yeah, for sure. I look at it, when we've been studying this for quite some time, and we've talked to a few people who've really taken a look, kind of the infrastructure, obviously with El Salvador, 70% or so are working on a cash basis, bankless in essence. So there is a bit of I won't say a black market economy, but it's much like here in the US, which I would say here in the United States, we have the largest cash economy in the world. Maybe if you can compare that to GDPs, it could be the size of maybe the top 10 countries if it's just on the cash economy. So if you look at El Salvador, 70% of those people are running on cash right now. Do you feel like this is potentially just a way for the country to essentially get into the taxation side of it their sales tax, their VAT tax, 13%, income tax, personal income tax, 30%, which is actually reasonable. And even in the sales tax side of things, I wish we had a VAT tax and less property tax and those kind of things here in the U.S. And less capital gains. So I'm just wondering, is this a potential opportunity for the country to maybe get back into what would be a good position for the country itself, is to be able to get more, government sovereign money through the utilization of digital assets like this?
I don't think that's the reason. No, and I'll tell you why. For those, I guess you're talking about those who are unbanked, who are running cash-based
Exactly.
businesses.
Yeah.
They're not declaring accounts. They're not paying tax. Those people
Right.
will still be able to do the same. Whilst the government has said that every economic agent must accept Bitcoin, I still think the majority of the business for these people will still be done in cash, and it will still
Right.
divert from that. I don't see a sudden huge wave of people suddenly using Bitcoin. Now that may come.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about an opportunity for the government to raise their tax receipts, I don't think that's why they're doing this. I think they're more likely to see a greater investment in the country from other people wanting to come in. That they've made it possible that you can get residency now for 3 Bitcoin. You just have to invest 3 Bitcoin. So
Right.
each person who
Yeah.
does that, 3 Bitcoin comes into the system. If 1,000 people do that, it's 3,000 Bitcoin. That's a serious amount of Bitcoin that's in the country, a serious amount of dollar value in Bitcoin that's come into the country, and that will hopefully, in the majority, stay within the country. If Bitcoin continues to appreciate and does a 10x, that 3,000 Bitcoin can do a 10x from there. On top of that, you're going to have businesses investing. I can't imagine there is a single Bitcoin-based company who isn't thinking about their El Salvador strategy now, whether that is just how they sell within the market, whether it could be a hardware wallet, or whether they should be having offices there, or whether they should be relocating there. The country is beautiful, it's sunny, it's a low cost of living, and there's no capital gains tax. The levels of corporation and personal tax are very low. I imagine every single Bitcoin-based company is looking there and thinking, this might be something we should consider. Listen, I'm considering it. I'm looking and going, well, maybe I should live there. So I think if the government were looking to boost the GDP of the country and potentially their tax receipts off the back of that, I think that's going to be more based on investment coming in externally into the country rather than creating a new system to track all these cash-based businesses.
Yeah. Well, here in the U.S., the U.S. Potential opportunity to get and convert to a digital dollar would essentially remove cash out of the system. It's one thing that I think there's been some strategies talked about over the years that have started to look at how do we reduce or remove the cash, literally the physical cash from our system. Obviously, if you do that within a country the size of ours, that's going to be a huge impact, which is an interesting aspect because there's both for and against. Obviously, I think the tax base, it'll just naturally rise because of people going to digital, especially if you have something like what we're seeing here in the United States. And we're far from the percentage of unbanked that countries like in El Salvador, or even some of the African countries that are kind of in that space. So I'm just kind of curious. I see this as eventually it's going to have some kind of impact both on business and individuals, both in a positive way. And for some, it's, yeah, sure, there's going to be some negative impacts as well. But I do think this is going to be one of those scenarios. Do you look at, and I love the point when you were interviewing the president, I caught in a few things. One was the...
Sorry.
No problem. One was the ability for them to, on the fly within the tech itself, I guess this is in the Strike app, where the merchant could convert to US dollars right there on the fly from a remittancer that would be paying in Satoshis, but the retailer could take US dollars. That's a pretty fascinating fundamental for that app.
Well, okay, firstly, this isn't the Strike app. The Strike app is an app which allows people to send remittance from the US into El Salvador, and also acts like a Venmo within the country, whereby you can send money to each other and pay for things. The government is working on their own app, and what they've said as part of the bill, they did say that every economic agent has to accept Bitcoin, but they recognize two things of that. Firstly, some people don't want to hold Bitcoin, and secondly, some people will need the dollars to operate their business. So they were very smart, and they said, listen, every economic agent has to accept Bitcoin. And I think the reason they've done that is they want Bitcoin into the country. They want investment in. They want people to come in, and that will start that Bitcoin circulating. But they've also put in that a facility whereby if you have the app, you can instantly convert that to dollars, so that you do not have to hold Bitcoin. You don't. It
Right.
doesn't affect your daily business. All you have to do is have an application which says, put in the dollar amount. It will convert that value to Bitcoin for the payer, and then it will immediately convert that back into the dollar for the individual. Now, listen, we need to see some of the details with regards to this. How are they handling slippage? How are they handling conversion rates? Because it's not free to trade Bitcoin. But I think we have to just wait and see what the detail of that is. Many people are unhappy with this. Many people are saying this is wrong. You shouldn't force people to accept Bitcoin. I look at it slightly different. Is that all they're doing is ensuring that people can pay with Bitcoin, which is going to support the local economy, but also thinking of the retailers and ensuring that they don't have to hold on to the asset if they don't want to.
Yeah. Well, I think, when you look at and listening to the interview you did with the president there, I think their mission goals are in line with kind of the overview of where Bitcoin in general is, which is, the ability to kind of get that free monetary system, or that new and revised monetary system for what could be the future of a lot of these kinds of countries. And in this particular case with Bukele, I think it's a good move for them. The question is, will it work? If they can get enough adoption rate. I saw a study out of the Cato Institute. They were seeing fairly low adoption rates so far, but I'm like, it's early. This is going to take some time to move its way into society. And I think that's going to be the big tell right there. If they can get a fully functional Bitcoin government wallet, obviously the Strike wallet and what they're doing there, get enough retailers, and also get enough of the unbanked moved in, because this is going to change some people's lives for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. People within El Salvador don't generally have a culture of saving. And as you said, 70% don't have bank accounts. It's a cash-based country primarily, especially outside of the major cities. And these people can't get. It's not that they've chosen not to do it. They actually can't get access to bank accounts because they don't have the money. A lot live hand to mouth, and also have to subsidize their income with money which is sent abroad from friends and families. But at the same time, this might change the culture and say, look, you know what? I can just put a small amount by. Maybe in 10 years, this will pay for college for my kids, or, an investment opportunity. It's just going to shift the dial slightly. But this is like a project we've never seen before in this world.
Exactly.
We've had countries change their currency, but we've never had a country adopt a decentralized currency like Bitcoin before. And Bitcoin's wild. It's like nothing we've ever had before. It's one of those things that's really hard to get your head around. You have to spend a lot of time learning it. Look, I've been in this space for like nearly 5 years now. There's so much I don't know. I'm always learning, and we're going to put this into, well, not we, but it's going to be put into a country. It's a brave move. I think there will be lots of speed bumps along the way, lots of learning. This isn't just about not just about people adopting it and accepting it for payments, but also in terms of what does volatility mean for a nation. There's so many unknowns. All we can do as people who believe and support human freedom and want to help the people of El Salvador remove their reliance on the US dollar to have another opportunity for something else. So all we can do is help support them, provide advice, provide guidance. Anyone who's a Bitcoiner can go visit, can reach out, can support the projects there. I hope it works, because there's so much good within Bitcoin. There's so much that you can offer the world, especially these smaller nations, that I hope the project is successful, and I'll do everything I can to support it.
Yeah, I think you said it best in your podcast. I'm a little skeptical, but yet optimistic about this. It's
cautiously
just kind of one of those things. Yeah, there you go. It's cautiously skeptical, and I think
no,
that's
cautiously. Sorry. No, I said cautiously optimistic.
Okay, perfect. So I'm a little skeptical, but yet optimistic, in the sense that there are a lot of factors at play. Obviously, their situation with the IMF and the World Bank. That in itself, that relationship, they're essentially forging something that's never been forged before by any country in the world. So that's probably going to set up a, somewhat of a model for other countries to eventually adopt, to try to utilize that. So Bukele, I think, may end up being one of the pioneers in how to architect deals, how to put together, negotiation deals with some of the central banks, and what that may end up playing out to be. So it's going to be interesting to watch for sure.
Well, listen, look, the IMF doesn't want them to do this. The World
Yeah,
Bank doesn't want them to do this. The US government doesn't want them to do this. Probably European countries don't want them to do this. Every single international institution controlled by the US probably doesn't want them to do this.
right.
The opposition parties within El Salvador doesn't want them to do this. A lot of the population doesn't want them to do this. People who hate Bitcoin, people like Peter Schiff and Steve Hanke and Nuro Rabini, the same people who are always moaning and whinging about Bitcoin, don't want them to do this. Like there's so many people who want this to fail, and
Yeah,
this is a huge political gamble for him. This is a guy with very high approval ratings, and he's like, no, we've had enough of this. I want to bring opportunity to my people of my country. I want to give them the opportunity of prosperity and better security. I want to raise this country up. And he spent the time learning Bitcoin, which many of these people haven't done. He's spent the time,
right.
he's put the time in, he understands it, he understands the risks, but he understands the benefits. He understands how beautiful the system is. And I think the project will be successful, but it will be difficult and it will come with challenges. But I think it will be difficult, and I think it will raise up El Salvador, because all they're really doing is they're adding a currency which can't be inflated in a world of inflated currencies. We've seen the effect this has had on the world. We've seen what it's doing in Europe. We've seen what happened in it was happening in the US. We've seen the case studies of what happened in Lebanon or Venezuela or Zimbabwe. If you continue to print money, you drive inflation. It's very, very simple. You can't print Bitcoin, so you can't inflate it. So this takes the money printer out of the hands of the politicians, those who never really pay for their mistakes. This takes it out of the hands of the bankers. This puts it in, well, it doesn't put it in anyone's hands. It gives no one the ability. So for once, we have a monetary system, and a free, open, fair monetary system that anyone could connect to, which can't be inflated. I think it's going to be great for Venezuela. I think this is going to be great for El Salvador, and hopefully other countries will look at this soon, and this is going to change the way money works in the world. And I know that sounds hyperbolic. And if some of your listeners think, oh, you're just another Bitcoin nutter. No, I've just done the time. I've just done the work. Yeah. I've researched Bitcoin. I've been to El Salvador. I understand the trade-offs. I understand the pros and the cons, but this is a chance to have a good, hard form of money for a whole country, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, the evolution of where the monetary system is moving, and you're exactly right. There are a lot of, underlying things that are at stake here that are definitely pushing against this. But, the first person through the wall always gets bloody. I think it's one of those scenarios that Bukele has taken on as a world lead and charge. I think this is going to raise whether they win or lose in this, it's going to raise them up in standing within the world, just in the sense that they're taking risks and trying things that a lot of countries unfortunately cannot do. They, in their particular situation, have a few, it's a slight window, but it's one that definitely I could see why he pulled it off at the time he did, especially with his popularity rating, his time in office. They've been able to somewhat curb some of the some of the bad eggs that were in the government there, and I think that's been able to give him some open field to run in. So it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out within the rest of the countries. And you look at, because there's going to be a lot of mid-size and emerging countries on the rise that are looking at this case very, very closely. A lot of movement already being talked about in Paraguay, in Mexico. We're seeing all sorts of African countries that have already kind of said, get ready. How far do you think this will take within, let's say we get a successful run on this in 18 months. And, the rollout, I know he's got a 90-day rollout, fairly aggressive, but I think it's one they can meet based on what he's done so far. But let's say 18 months down the road, everything's been good, fair adoption rate, the businesses are kind of plugged into it. We see the economy starting to grow. How long before you see other countries kind of following suit?
Yeah, I mean, good question. Who knows? It's an open question. All we can look at is the signal out there. And as you said, Paraguay, Panama, Mexico. Well, let's say Paraguay and Panama. There are like very serious signals, especially in Paraguay with their
Right.
hydroelectric dams, realizing they can bring Bitcoin miners there and raise up their GDP. But we've had
Hmm.
a potential bill that's going in Panama. We've had politicians in Argentina, Tonga, Tanzania, Mexico, Brazil. I might even repeat some of these, all signaling with their laser eyes.
Yeah.
People have started to realize a couple of things. I mean, firstly, politically, it's something you can hang your hat on as a politician.
Right.
You might not even
Right.
love Bitcoin, right? But it's something you can hang your
Hmm.
hat on and say, you know what, this is interesting. This is something I should look at. This is something the young people care about. Yeah, so that's one thing. But the other thing is, you can even forget about Bitcoin itself and say, do you know what? I don't understand the economics of Bitcoin. Uh, I'm not somebody who believes in a decentralized system. Whatever. I don't really care. The reality is, the remittance market in the world is worth close to $1 trillion, and a large percentage of that is going to
Yep.
the remittance companies. For what? For converting money. And using the Bitcoin rails, you can transfer synthetic dollars around the world, or you can
Hmm.
also transfer Bitcoin instantly using the Lightning Network. You have the opportunity to transfer value globally and instantly. This cuts out the remittance companies. This puts more money in the hands of the people that need it. And usually we're talking about poor countries and poor people.
Right.
That's
Right.
usually those who rely on remittance. I was chatting to the guy from Tonga. 41%, well, 40.07% of their GDP is remittance.
Hmm.
Now imagine they can wipe away the remittance costs. That might put somewhere between 40 and
Huge.
$60 million into that country, which leads to better tax receipts for the government, but also leads to more money in the hands of the people and raises up their standards. So, for the remittance reason alone, any country which has got double-digit remittance should certainly be looking at this. Should certainly be
Hmm.
considering the Bitcoin Rails network just as a way to increase the GDP of their country, and that's just like a first little step.
Right.
Beyond that, there's obviously other opportunities with Bitcoin, but you can't stop Bitcoin now. We've been 12 years. It's had every form of attack. This is inevitable now. This is happening. It's rolling out. Every denier has been proved wrong time and time again. Every prediction they've made that Bitcoin will die and the price will crash is come back, and it's come back and it's roared. And as to these people out there who deny Bitcoin, who still don't understand it or still think it's going to die and collapse, you've just not done the work. I'm sorry, you've just
Yeah.
not done the work. You do not understand what you're talking about. Spend the time, do the research, read the bullish case for Bitcoin, listen to the podcasts out there, spend time talking to experts, because if you've done the work, you understand why this is inevitable. This is why people hold their money in Bitcoin, because they want it out of control of the government. They want to control and own their own money. And because of that, it's the best form of money there is. And as I said, this sounds hyperbolic, but just do the work. All the information is out there.
Yeah, well, I think the people who watch our show, they are definitely all in Bitcoin holders,
Good lads
etc. We
and
have,
ladies.
yeah, and great people that are really in this for the long haul. I think when me, and of course I hold Bitcoin and I'm a big evangelist of it. I believe in the new monetary system, but I also am somewhat realistic in the sense of because I kind of was raised in Silicon Valley, so I've seen kind of the shift of major markets and kind of the devastation that some of these markets essentially put others out of business. And it's just like whether you look at the travel industry from the internet, you look at all sorts of how businesses in general, entire economies have been shifted through the evolution of some form of technology. And Bitcoin really is no different. The one thing that kind of plays differently with Bitcoin is this is something that's going to shift the monetary system. So it's the first real shift from a financial standpoint. So I guess the argument I always have is, so far there hasn't been, other than small, bans here and there. Then we've seen some countries start to kind of get back in line and say maybe there is something here. Countries like India, et cetera, that have started to move in this direction. Obviously, China's gone with the digital yuan route and evacuated the miners, and we've seen that. But we haven't seen a G7 come in here yet. And when I say come in, meaning take a position one way or the other, whether it's UK, Australia, the United States, Canada, any of those have not really said, wait a minute, this is what we're going to do. Other than what we've seen with early on research at MIT for the Fed coin, to essentially, run along it. And Saylor's talked about this, that he thinks the digital dollar eventually will also work in unison with Bitcoin. How do you see that playing out with some of these bigger entities kind of moving down? With all the people you've talked to, any insights there?
Well, 2 points. The first point is with regards to Silicon Valley, where you talk about how the innovation there has decimated industries. Look, firstly, that's a fact. That's a fact of innovation.
Sure.
We move on.
You bet.
People invent things, and society moves on, and we just change, and that's just the reality of it. But the bigger point with regards to Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley has only been enabled by the flood of cheap credit in the market. The fact that these companies can find cheap credit, and they can find the VCs to fund them to build these businesses that don't make any money, sometimes ever. I mean, look at Amazon. Look how little money and profit that company has been able to make. And how many businesses that's decimated. That's because it's cheap credit in the system. So the cheap credit has enabled Silicon Valley to go out and decimate these industries. I mean, I always think specifically what Uber did to the taxi market in India, which led to masses of people committing suicide. I can't remember the exact numbers. I might have exaggerated there, but like they have these devastating effects because they have access to cheap money, and they can go out and they can destroy the competition. They can go to somewhere like India, offer these cars, give them out on credit with a loan to repay. The taxi drivers can go out and they can start earning money instantly. And then what happens? Market forces come into play. There's too many drivers, the rates come down, and then they can't afford their loans. It's cheap credit that has often allowed these companies to go around to go around the world and decimate companies. On a separate point, and you say no G7 countries. Well, I think we can challenge that slightly with the US. Okay, the US federal government is hardly pro-Bitcoin, but the US has a federal system. Look what's happened in Texas. Look what's happened in Wyoming. Look what's happening in Florida. Mayor Francis, Senator Lumbus, Congressman Warren Davison. Because of the beauty of the federal system in the US and the state system, you now have politicians who actually have to work in not now, I mean, you've always had that way, but you have to work in the best interest of their state and their people. And they understand Bitcoin, they understand what it brings, and they understand the opportunity it creates within their state. So they are pro. Someone like UK, we don't have this federal system. We have this nonsense system whereby it's one rule for all. So there's no competition within governance. The competition within governance in the US has made regulatory friendly environments for Bitcoin. I would be more than happy to base a Bitcoin business in Wyoming, Florida, or Texas and feel like I'm protected in that state. So I say we have. I say we have that in the US, and the US will lead the way there in many ways. So yeah, sorry, I kind of disagree with you. I know it's not the federal government, but still, it is. They are jurisdictions which you can operate within.
Well, no, definitely that is the case. The republic here in the United States is a very important thing. It's exactly what I think a lot of people don't understand about our country that does make it so great, to your point. However, we're talking about a monetary system that is essentially the national governance and the treasury of the country, which all people fall into. And there is the opportunity here. We live in Florida. We're here for that reason, among others, which is very pro-economic, prosperity, and also a lot of freedoms, which we have here in Florida that in places, it's during the last issue we dealt with, I won't say the words, but, Florida was probably one of the only, what I called the free states out here, because we were not seeing the kind of lockdowns, all those kind of things. So definitely the states have the ability to go in and possibly create some sort of subline, definitely create a lot of opportunity within both the Bitcoin economies. I would say, though, on Silicon Valley, this essentially is starting to flip over now to Bitcoin and a lot of the altcoins, we'll call them, is that that technology is... I know how much you're not enjoying those, but it's a fact of the world. Is that technology, and a lot of the VCs have started to move their money into these kinds of companies, which is going to be interesting to watch, because there's a lot of movement in that space for sure. So, what are your thoughts about that?
But I mean, you say altcoins, we call them shitcoins, and we call them for a reason. And really, they are just a Silicon Valley grift. It's a invest in my token early. We'll give you them at an introductory price. We'll then do a second
Yep.
round price when other investors come in. Then we'll release on the market and you can exit. And that happens time and time again. It's just a Silicon Valley grift. These tokens almost in every instance never have a real use case that anyone cares about. They're doing their seed round and IPO at the same time. They're doing it before
Yep.
achieving product market fit. It's absolutely lunatic. Could you imagine any Silicon Valley company going and doing their IPO based off a white paper? It would never happen. It's a seed round, then a Series
Yeah.
A, then a Series B, and so on until you IPO. And you only IPO at the point where you've probably become at least a national, hopefully a global company. You've got millions, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions in revenue. But these aren't. These are absolutely Silicon Valley grifts that are I think are most of them are a scam. So let's be honest about that one. Yeah, Silicon Valley companies will be investing in Bitcoin companies. It's hard to make money in Bitcoin, so they might find it difficult. It's not like their traditional investments, but yeah, money is going into this. But the world is changing, and one of the great things about Bitcoin is a leveler. If you hold Bitcoin in India, in USA or El Salvador, when Bitcoin goes up 10%, it goes up at 10% for everyone. It's a great leveler. You can work from anywhere. The sovereign individual thesis, while I can't entirely say this is going to play out, the sovereign individual thesis is happening. I can move to El Salvador right now, pay my Bitcoin for my residency. I can live in El Zonte and I can live on my Bitcoin. I don't need to touch or use the dollar. That is now possible, and they're the first one. And you know what? We had the first user, and then we had the first 10 users, and then we got up to thousands, and then millions. We had our first companies. Now we got our first country. This is happening, and anyone who ignores it is just missing a complete change to the the monetary system of the world.